Today, and here we are, another live episode of Teachers for Teachers. I'm Dr. Dejana, and I'm here with my dear friend, Dr. Leah. And whoa, there's a lot going on in the world today. Isn't that right?
Whoa, there is a lot and a lot to try and sort through. There are so many people who are just so desperate to have their message heard and to and really for us and for the purposes of this next half hour, along with talking about simplicity parenting with our friend Kim John Payne, we're going to talk about how to talk about what's going on with kids.
That's so important. And I'm sure there's a lot of you, I mean, myself included, that woke up this morning and realized that I needed to have a conversation. I needed to have a conversation with my own children. And as a teacher, I need to figure out how to facilitate a conversation for my students. And these conversations are so important because having these conversations today, I think that's what's going to help us in the future when these young people are the adults in the situation and they can remember how we talked and we came together and we got through this. So it's so important that we take time to just recognize right now there are protests happening, there is unrest, there is looting, there is violence, there are problems that are being brought into the light right now with society, and our children are watching, we are watching. People's hearts are broken, we don't know what to do, but we can still come together in discourse. And I'm really excited to hear from our panel today and figure out how can we embrace one another and help us get through.
I
Like, what type of conversations can we have with ourselves, with our children, and how can we facilitate those kinds of conversations?
Absolutely. Well, let's start with the micro, Deshana. What did you say to your kids?
Oh my gosh. So this morning when I woke up, my daughter just had a birthday, so she's kind of in another zone right now. But my two preteens, I said, "Do you guys know what's going on in the world? Because we're on quarantine too, so we're kind of a little locked down. So I just wanted to check in and say, do you know what's happening right now?" And my son said, "Yes, yes. There's people protesting for justice because somebody was murdered, and there were police involved, and but I heard there's rioting and that the streets are like on fire and there's a lot of violence out there." And I said, "Yes, that is what's happening." And I just want to make sure that we in our house can create a space where we can talk about what this is and how does that feel, and how does that feel me being a black mother and my son being a black young man, and what impact is it having on our home, our own lives, and our communities. So really, what I did is I said, we can talk about this. This is a safe space. I want us to share our feelings. And that's really all I could do, was to try and create a space for sharing because our feelings are raw right now. My dad, my 70-year-old dad, got up this morning. He got his broom and a bunch of trash bags, put them in the trunk of his station wagon, and went to downtown to start cleaning up.
Oh,
Like, literally, with his
right.
broom.
Well, it
With
makes
his
it easier to understand who you are based on that being your
So,
dad.
and he texted my kids, "This is what I'm doing today. I'm heartbroken, but this is what how I'm going to show up today."
That's
So
wonderful.
those are the type of conversations that we're trying to have in our house. But because it's so raw with so many different emotions, and they have so many friends from different perspectives and different lenses, I'm focusing on creating a safe space for discourse.
That's
So
wonderful. Yeah.
that's the best I can do. I can't wait to hear from the panel because I think this is a community thing and we need to hear from each other
Right?
as we work through.
Well, let's get started with Kim Jong Payne. So I will, in full disclosure, tell you that I am already a huge fan of his because I was in graduate school with him. So I come to this with a bias for sure. And I think at the end of the conversation, you'll understand why. But when Dejana and I first talked about this, she had already been following Simplicity Parenting and was so excited to hear that you might join us, Kim. So please welcome to the show, and I'm sure, Dejana, you have questions because you've had plenty of them that you've told me about. So, want to know that you get started.
I think
So, welcome, Kim.
yes, we're so glad to have you here, Kim. And I think it'd be great to start off with just kind of sharing with our viewers a little bit about simplicity parenting. I might be a fan, but I think it'd be great to hear from you so they can kind of get an idea of where you're coming from. That'd be great.
Very pleased to, Dejana. You look like magnificent with your peacock feathers behind you. You know, it's just resplendent, absolutely resplendent. Um, actually, it's interesting what you were saying, Dejana, because I have a daughter who's 18 who just graduated. She's one of those seniors who just graduated um, yesterday, and the graduation was very, very much a graduation for the class. Uh, I would say there was a certain grieving for what's going on at the moment. The addresses of the students changed on a dime and went to addressing the issues of the world and around them. But there was also a celebration um, of of the freedoms that we have, so that we know when they're being transgressed. You know, it was a very interesting. It was very interesting to say you can't have something. You don't know if something's being taken away from you unless you've been given it, or you know you need to have it, and others do. And it was a very interesting conversation with these 18-year-olds yesterday as they were supposed to be celebrating their graduation, but where their minds were on the streets with people protesting. And they finished their graduation and they did this car kind of thing around the town, and the police were all there. There were 4 or 5 police cars all blocking off the highways, letting the kids parade, and there you saw the police doing really great stuff. There they were, helping these 18-year-olds, really helping them celebrate their graduation. And there we are with one picture and then the other. And I talked to my daughter about how she was putting those two together. And like you, Dejana, I just wanted to create a safe space for her to be able to talk about it. When I talk about it, when I would talk about these things with my children, being white male, with all that implies. Um, I've always been careful to say to the kids when they were little that there are good people trying to make the peace at the moment. There are good people trying to work this out. A lot of people are thinking about this, and people are moving in. I wish I had known about your father. I would have told them about that. You know, there are people cleaning this, trying to clean this up, on so many different levels. And that message sustained them all through their younger years, up through 7, 8, 9, 10 years old. That message somewhat sustained them, but at about 9, it was time. It's about that age, really, when more conversations needed to happen about what was happening. And it's been very interesting over the years, because we held a lot of those conversations back just with the message that you're safe, family and friends are around you, we're going to do our best to keep you safe. That's just for a little child. And we kept that message back from my kids, the hard, harsh, brutal, really brutal stuff. And it's been interesting because my kids got to 14, 15 and they turned into social warriors. My daughter, from the time she was in 10th grade, has been almost full-time volunteering at the ACLU. That's her internship. That's what she lives for.
And Kim, were your kids homeschooled in the earlier years?
Yeah.
So when did they start high school?
They, my 8th grade.
8th grade, yeah.
They went into a big school at 8th grade.
And what started for you? What got you started? What sparked the simplicity movement for you?
Well, for me, I was working in a group home for gang members, and I was doing that at night time. And during the I worked from 6 o'clock at night to 3 o'clock in the morning. It was called the action shift because it was.
Right.
And these were beautiful kids, but they were just oppressed by the juvenile justice system. These were great kids. They'd suffered a lot. And I was going to lectures in the evening studying psychology, and I always add, and I'm okay now, I'm fine, recovered. I was hearing about what we know now as PTSD. Only it wasn't called that then. It was called shell shock. This is back. Well, it was called trauma response. It was just that term was just emerging out of the shell shock terminology. And this guy was talking about Korean veterans, Vietnam veterans, but I was thinking about my kids in the group home because they looked like they'd been through a war. They were nervous, jumpy, hyper-vigilant, they were over-controlling, they had night terrors, just like the wartime soldiers that weren't doing so well. Then I volunteered, and I worked in the Thai Cambodian refugee camps for quite some time, and that was right. Do you remember the Pol Pot, the time of the Khmer Rouge, and that was right then, and it was very unpredictable time to be there. And I saw nervous, jumpy, hypervigilant, over-controlling kids, same deal, and it really reminded me of the kids back in Australia, my birth country. They looked just the same, but I could get my head around it that these kids were coming out of war. Okay. So I decided to study it more. It was my first go at postgrad study there. You encountered me at the second go. And so I decided to study it, and I had a little counselling practice, mixed ethnic, racial, mixed economic area near London. And through the door came nervous, jumpy, hyper-vigilant, over-controlling, and they looked like wartime kids, only they were from regular families, so, typical families. And I kind of came to think of this as the undeclared war on childhood, because these kids were living life at too fast a pace, too much, too soon, too sexy, too young. The only thread that I could link, that I could find at the time, this is a pretty young guy, I was just in my mid to late 20s, was that they were being overwhelmed with the pace of life, overwhelmed with just too much going on. And it was in the early days of brain science. So I used to look these searches up on microfiche. Do you remember?
Oh yes, I do.
I used to look stuff up on microfiche, for goodness sake, and there was early data coming out that was saying basically these kids are the amygdala, the reptilian, the fight or flight brain was being completely overstimulated, and these kids were hypervigilant and they couldn't return back to a normal state. But the problem was, Leah, to answer your question, that the problem was that they were suffering the new normal of the supersized life that kids are expected to lead, which studies have shown that our brain will be ready for that level of pace of life and stress in about 900 years. We've got 900 years ahead of our kids' ability to cope with all this stuff. And so we did some studies, myself and the team. The studies really grew and grew, and we thought, well, if under the radar, cumulative new normal stress is what is causing these kids to look like wartime kids. In brief, we thought, well, what about just unstressing their lives as much as we could? What about we just dial back on scheduling, dial back too many activities, soccer on Monday, ballet on Tuesday, and classes and tutoring on Wednesday and psychotherapy on Friday to cope with it all. Like, just too much, just dial it all back. We started dialing back the amount of screen exposure, TV, news, violent stuff kids were seeing. But we also started decluttering their homes, just cleaning up so that the kids weren't avalanched with too much stuff. The average American kid's got about 150 toys, and that means the 3,000 piece Lego set counts as one, right? It's just, avalanche of stuff. There's too much stuff on so many levels. And then we added a bunch of predictability and rhythm, because it occurred to me when I was talking to these kids, and there were a lot of them that I was working with. This was a postgrad study in my dissertation. Is that one thing they had in common is that life was really unpredictable. You know, it was really unpredictable. And with all the events going on in these last months and this last week, gosh, that is you know, the case for a lot of kids. So we started asking parents to be as rhythmical and predictable as possible, to really introduce predictability, to introduce little rituals, routines, rhythms into their home. And what we found is that about just below 70%, 68.7% of these kids, in some studies, in one study we did into ADHD, attention deficit, 68% of them went from dysfunctional to functional within 4 months with no medication. And they're above the 98th percentile. I mean, these kids were clinically hyperactive and clinically inattentive. And now I'm not suggesting that they turned into little angels. They were still, you know, they could still be right little rotters at times, absolutely. But but they were teachable, reachable. They were doing okay. There was more give in their souls. There was more, and so since then, it's just gotten faster. It's gotten more intense on one hand, but on the other hand, the more and more parents got this feeling, hang on, something is not right, something is wrong, something is off base, this is weird, we never had to cope with what these kids are coping with. What can we do to stay in life, right? We're living our lives, but also trust our gut instinct, because our gut is telling us, woo, 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 we've got to slow all this down. So that's the sort of, that's how this has grown, and it's grown. Like, we have over 1,200 coaches around the world now, and it's remarkable. A little grassroots movement, you know, that right as we talk now, all across this nation, across the world, there's probably any number of people meeting in church halls, you know, lounge rooms, classrooms, wherever they can, talking about how to dial life back. And it's almost embarrassing to say it, but just simply give our children a childhood. And that's what the Simplicity Parenting movement has become. And this book, this funny little book, do you remember it, Leah? It's an ugly little book.
Oh, I remember it very well. Not at all ugly, in my opinion.
It's super ugly. The print is too small, the paper's nasty. I mean, it's an ugly little book, but it's one of the biggest selling parenting books in the world. And I don't say that to be vain. I grew up Presbyterian. We don't do that.
You're not allowed.
We freeze in a very cold hell for that. We keep all the cordwood and sell to the Catholics. They like it hot. And Baptists, they like it hot. But it's a phenomena. The reason I say that is it's a phenomena all around the world now. People are trying to reclaim childhood, and it's beautiful. Right at the same time when it's really speeding up, a lot of parents are saying, hang on a minute. And what Simplicity Parenting movement has done is given one voice for how to go about that in a fairly sensible way. Dejana, I know you look at the book a bit. I mean, that's my aim, is to make this sensible and doable. May I ask how you found it?
Yes, so let's see, my youngest daughter was born, and my children started going to a Waldorf-inspired school. And we had dear friends of ours that had gone to another school that basically completely based their entire philosophy on the book, Simplicity Parenting. And so I was challenged. This is a fun story, actually. I don't even think Leah knows this one. I was challenged to just try some things out and see if there was any changes. So this is where we did, we got rid of a lot of stuff. Kids don't need all of the stuff. And my kids had a lot of stuff. Grandma and grandpa, like, we had lots and lots of stuff. So we got rid of stuff. We also tried to get rid of commercialism and other influences that were just in our house, in our lives. You know, we have this lifestyle of turning on the news while we're having our morning coffee. Let's not do that anymore. Just simple things that we were easy enough to kind of change. and put a very light schedule on things and just see what was happening because I was getting super stressed out with my parenting situation and my children were feeling it as well. And so that was kind of my brief introduction. And I noticed a big change in how I was feeling and the energy in my own house with the new baby and my older kids. And I thought, I'm going to learn a little bit more about this. And that's when I got your shabby book with those rough pages and whatnot. And I took a deep dive and, I found it illuminating and I saw a lot of truth. And I also was mourning for all of the children out there that are growing up in this fast paced, highly commercial, full of stuff and things to do lifestyle. And that's when I really hooked on to like less is kind of more. And it helped me become a better person and a better parent to just kind of pull back. And I just found it joyful. And we were able to experience more joy as a family together. So that was my introduction, was from friends at my Waldorf school where we were kind of trying to go a different approach with education. And they were really, this could really change how your family lifestyle is. They saw where I was struggling. And I read it and I found it really helpful. And I was so excited that Leah told me she knew you personally and that you had agreed to come onto this show because I think this show is all about teachers, which have become parents. Actually, they were always teachers. Parents were always teachers. We're always a big part of our child's education. And I thought this is a great opportunity to share some of these techniques of how you can simplify things. Because I think as soon as school became in the home, like things were not simple. So I'm so excited to have you here to share some of your observations, your thoughts, and your ideas with all of our viewers because I think we need a little reminder of how this can really be transformational for not only our lives, the lives of our children, but it can even transform communities. And when I say communities, I'm talking about schools, church groups. I don't know. When you come together, it can really kind of transform the energy and the calm that you feel when you come together and learning. So I am super excited that you're here. I had a couple of specific questions, Leah. I don't know, do we have time?
Well, yeah, what I'd like to do is bring in the rest of the panel too to see if there are other questions and thoughts on this. So welcome. We have Tim Griffin back with us, and Marcella, Dr. Klein Williams is here, Jamie Wagner, and Anne McMullen. And everyone has some relationship to education, and that's why they're here, and also to parenting, which is another reason why they're here. And I wonder, Jamie teaches fifth grade, and she was talking earlier about how she talked to her class today about what's going on in the community. And I wondered maybe if you share that, Jamie, and we can get Kim to chime in on that idea.
Sure. I feel like I'm a bit of a downer now because this has been so great and to hear about Simplicity Parenting, which is so fabulous. I teach fifth grade and I spoke to my students today. I'm fortunate enough to work with a teaching team who's fantastic. And so my teacher who teaches the other fifth grade section is an African-American woman, and she largely led the discussion, and that was really helpful. And the other teacher and I chimed in, and I teach at a fairly affluent West Los Angeles private school, and there are a lot of kids in the class who look like me. And so trying to help kids who look like me understand what it is to not look like we look is difficult because we have a lot of great literature, a lot of things to cover, but I've been angsting sort of over the weekend about how do I give them a good example. And so here's the example I gave to my students. When you walk in, let's say you walk into the bathroom, and every time you walk into the bathroom in your house, you get an electric shock. Sometimes a light electric shock, sometimes a really heavy electric shock, and you fall on your knees, but every time you walk in the bathroom, you get shocked. And you have to walk in the bathroom because you have no other options, and this is the bathroom you have to use. But you're the only one in your family that gets shocked. Mom doesn't get shocked, dad doesn't get shocked, siblings don't get shocked, it's just you. And so you're telling your parents about it, like, this is happening to me, and it's so awful, and it feels terrible, and I need you, we'll get an electrician out, we'll definitely get the electrician. So for a few weeks you're hearing about how the electrician's coming, and the electrician doesn't show up. And still, every time you walk into the bathroom, you're getting shocked. And finally, you're sitting at the table and going, Mom, if you were the one getting shocked, you would have done something about this because you would like feeling like this. and still nothing happens. And finally you walk into the bathroom one day and you get shocked so badly you fall to the ground. Can you understand getting up off of that bathroom ground and being so angry that you take the closest thing you can find and smash it against the wall? Can you understand being so frustrated that you just destroy that bathroom because no one is listening to you, and when are you going to stop being shocked? And so that was the example that we worked on with my students, for them to understand what it is to always be on guard, to always be worried, and always feel like you're watching other people around you who you care about and enjoy being with not experience the same thing. So my own daughter happened to be in that class, and she related part of the story to my mother, which was interesting to hear her and what her understanding of it was. But that's how I hoped to work to help my students sort of understand what that feeling must be like. Not that I know exactly what it must be like, but that we have to start understanding. And the minute we stop having the conversation because we're worried that we don't fit in quite right, or we might say the wrong word, you have to put yourself out there and be willing to be part of the conversation, because as soon as we stop talking, we stop working towards a solution. So if I can leave my fifth graders with that, then I feel like they can continue to grow and hopefully make a difference. Because one of the reasons I teach where I teach is because I feel like a lot of them will have the connections and abilities to make the future a better place. And my hope is that they do.
Yeah, it's a real challenge to get kids who don't experience any of that, and even, well, younger kids who might experience it but don't know why. It's a complicated issue. And Kim, your kids being home until basically till high school, I guess, because where I left off when we were grad school students together, they were little ones at home, and you live in the country, I think, right? So what's their when they finally got to school, what's their response to the differences that go on between the inequities and what's available to one group and not to another? Are they hyper aware of it, or how does that work?
Just really briefly, because I'd love to hear from Marcella and Tim and Anne as well. I remember it's a good example. We have a farm, and we farm it permaculturally, organically, and it's very important to us that we do that. And I remember the first time our girls hadn't been on an aeroplane. We try not to do that too much, but we took them across country and on our motorcycles, on the back of our motorcycles, and we rode from Massachusetts to San Francisco. But we deliberately we went to places, and I remember one, I just want to mention one, in West Virginia. We have a very special relationship with the land. We care for it, and we've raised our kids, probably like all of us, we've raised our kids that way. And we didn't talk too much about global warming, degradation, anything like that. We just worked for the good. We didn't work against anything, we worked for the good of the land. We were standing in an open cut coal mine in West Virginia, and I remember both my kids got off the motorcycles and they had to take their helmets off because they were streaming tears. Were streaming down their faces, and they said, "Daddy, how could anyone do this to our planet?" That's the word, our. And in short, because they'd been raised with goodness, because they'd been raised taking care, working with other farmers, being around, working towards something, when they saw something so wounded, it affected them so deeply that my daughter, years later, this is not the ACLU one, it's another one, at college founded a permaculture group, and she got a ton of grant money, and they started a little city farm right there. Do you see, when we raise our kids for something, when something then really dramatically is wrong, they then know what to work towards, as opposed to raising our kids telling them the world is bad, there are bad people, and giving them that predominant message. So that's one brief little example. I'd love to hear what Tim and Marcella and
well, and thank you for that. I think we're going to go a little bit long tonight, just so that we can get everybody's opinion in. So, but thank you for that, Kim. Marcella, how are you?
I'm good. I think I'll have to go next because I do have to jump into another meeting, but I find this a really thought-provoking conversation. And I think one of the opportunities of slowing down is that opportunity for reflection. And I know in raising my own children, I wanted to start early with them to be thoughtful on their own about the choices that they made and how they would impact others. And I think when I look at where we're at right now, there aren't any simple answers, not to any of the burdens that we carry right now. And what is needed is, how do we create a space for, what Dehandra had said about open discourse, and kind of embracing that not every moment is going to be comfortable. And there are going to be some moments where we have to rest in being ill at ease. And, how do we still continue to move forward from there? Because as much as we perhaps would want to create an environment for children, that life is still going to happen around them. No matter what environment they have, they'll have their ups and their downs. So how do we accustom not only children but all of us to be prepared and to be reflective of it, and while still being able to carry hope?
Well said. Thank you. And how about Tim? Do you have something to add to the conversation? You usually do.
Well, thank you. I don't have a lot, because in 1992, when the riots happened, I was just becoming a new teacher in a part of Los Angeles that was deeply affected in the riots. And how do I, as a white man coming from privilege, talk to these children about what's going on in their neighborhood? And it was third grade, so I didn't want to overload them with too much of the history of it. And there are some great websites, including The Root, which is an African American journalism and opinion and current affairs website. They've got a really good piece today. It's a little historical context for the riots going on, and it just sort of takes some key episodes in American history, starting in 1609 with the landing of the first slaves in the Americas. But for younger kids, what I mostly wanted to emphasize to them was, again, number one, you're safe. Your parents are going to keep you safe. You're going to be safe here at school. And as far as the writing goes, it's partly about people getting so angry because you know how when you feel like you have something that you need to talk about and you're just not being listened to or understood, and it just gets in here and that's that happens for grown-ups too. Grown-ups get upset too sometimes. And just like kids will sometimes get so boiling that they'll just explode and go a little bit nuts for a little while, and then they kind of need to get it together. Grown-ups can do that too. But these are hard questions. We've been struggling with them for hundreds of years and still haven't answered all of them effectively. But just try and make sure that the kids feel safe. Kim was emphasizing earlier that there's an appropriate age where you get into different levels of how much you want to know, because you want to give them context, but what you don't want to do is say, okay, now here's a terrible story about all the horrible things that have happened. Good night. And so it's a judgment call, and you got to know your kids.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you, Tim, and thank you all for staying a little bit late with us. Anne, do you have something you'd like to ask or say about this topic?
Well, it's been fascinating to listen to this, and I just so appreciate it. I would have loved to have been a fly on the wall with Jamie and her students and to hear their response, because I think you gave great context to what's happening in a way that kids could understand and relate to that. I think the other takeaway, and it really started with Dejana talking about her dad, because I think in the midst of all the horror we need to focus on the heroes like her father. And people, and actually just today, my husband had an appointment in Santa Monica, and I was concerned about everything that had gone on there, and and what they see are the people volunteering, trying to help clean up to make it, to make it better. So I think it's very easy to focus on the bad news, and we just, for kids especially, we need to direct that attention to people like the Jonas family, and what Jamie did with her students today was just remarkable, and I know a really good help for them. Yeah, Tim.
Thank you.
Just one quick follow-up comment. I agree with Ann. I really liked Jamie's metaphor. It reminded about the electricity, and Dejana's father reminded me of what Mr. Rogers said on television. Kim, if you're from Australia, you may not have grown up with Mr. Rogers on PBS TV. It was a children's program. He started his show the same year that American politicians were being assassinated, and there were domestic terror groups and explosions. It was pretty bad. And one thing he told the kids was, when things are looking really scary, find the helpers. Find the people who are working to make it better, because they are always there. If you look for them, you can find them. And those are the people you want to find.
Thank you for that. And Kim, go ahead, Dejana.
Go ahead. I was just going to say that's beautiful. Like, find the helpers, the people that want to clean things up. And I just want to end with my analogy for my dad. He did what he could. He wanted to go out there with his broom and his bags. And I want everybody out there to know that's what we can do, that we can see. The problem that exists is one that is hard to see, and it's a little bit more difficult to clean up. But we got to start somewhere, right?
Absolutely.
Have to kind of start somewhere.
Absolutely.
I'm reminded, if I may, just in closing, is
please,
okay,
yes,
final
please.
comment, just briefly. Tim, I'm just picking up on what you mentioned, is that several years ago, I was called to be a small part of a team working with the very, very large extended families that were being caused by the AIDS epidemic in Southern Africa. Because when one part of the family would die, very, very tragically, they would move in. And some of these very elderly people, grandmas and grandpas, were caring for 30 or 40 children. It was a very, very difficult situation. And so I was working in a place called Alexander Township in South Africa. It was one of the larger townships, so-called townships. I remember in the morning hearing the clang of people setting up scaffolding as the market would move in, and you would hear this term. I've never forgotten it. It was Subano, brother, Subano, sister, Subano, and you hear it joyfully shouted as the market folk greeted each other, and it meant, I see you. And then the refrain was Ngohona, which means, so now I am here. Because we can only be here when someone sees us. If we are not seen, how can we be human? Our humanity is robbed of us. And so our message, I think, all around our country to our children now is that we can begin, Dejana, as you're saying, with your dad's broom, and we can begin tonight by really making sure we see our children and they feel they are here.
Thank you for that. What a wonderful way to close this episode. And thank you all for staying with us a little bit long tonight, but I think that the topic warranted it, and we have such wonderful voices at the table. So thank you all, and thank you at home for being with us for another episode of Teachers for Teachers. That's you, Mom and Dad, and please join us again on Wednesday. Thank you.